Hey everyone, welcome back to MagicLinks Tea Time. My name is Brian from MagicLinks. Today we are joined by Annelise Campbell. She'll be on in just a minute. There she is. Annelise, it says waiting for you. I'm not sure. Hmm. Give me one moment. Annelise is jumping on now. There we go. Cool.
Hi,
Hello. Hi.
how are you?
Good. How are you? Happy
I'm,
Tuesday.
yes, happy Tuesday. It feels like a week has passed in 2 days.
I know, it's crazy, but thanks so much for joining us, Annalise. So first thing before we get started, it'd be great if you could please just share a little bit more about who you are and why you're joining today.
Yeah, sure. So my name is Annelise Campbell. I am the CEO and founder of an influencer marketing agency called CFG. CFG is, like I said, an influencer marketing agency with diversity and inclusion rooted in everything that we do.
Hmm.
I come from a advertising and marketing background. I led the entire influencer division at some of my former agencies, and I worked on a ton of really big prestige CPG brands and helped them kind of lay the groundwork for their influencer strategy when influencers were first becoming, a viable marketing tool.
Hmm.
And obviously, I'm a Black woman, and during my time in this space, I saw a lot of other content creators be overlooked and underpaid. And now I think brands are starting to realize that prioritization of diversity and inclusion in their marketing efforts are really important. Um, and I built CFG to solve for that. I wanted us to be the primary destination for multicultural talent. And I wanted us to be really rooted in performance because I think it's really important as an influencer, if you're going to be a brand partner, that you can actually deliver results and you feel good about what you're doing and you feel like you're represented and you know the value that your audience can provide. So that's a little bit about me. I've been doing this for quite some time. I always joke that I helped educate my clients on what influencers are when they didn't know. Like when bloggers were first becoming a thing,
Hmm.
I was the person kind of helping my former clients figure out, okay, what's our approach and what does our strategy look like?
Got it. Yeah. And so I guess honestly, like, why don't we start a little bit from the beginning? I know that your background, of course, is super in depth within this space. And
Hmm.
so before you started your own thing with CFG, and we'll get plenty into that because there's so many great learnings there. Tell us about, like, how did you get started just in general? What brought you to advertising and what did that experience look like?
Yeah, for sure. So, I didn't have anyone that worked in advertising in my family. Like, my family is a bunch of engineers and lawyers. And I think they would have been really happy if I went that route. Probably it would have been easier at the time. But my parents were really proactive and they saw that I took an interest in certain things. Like, they knew I was really good at storytelling. They always used to say, like, when TiVo and like DVR first came out, they always used to be like, Annalise would watch the commercials and rewind them and be like, watch this. This was really good.
Mm.
And I wasn't even really privy to that. Like, I didn't realize that that was something that was of particular interest to me until they pointed it out. And they're like, yeah, you really like this. And I was like, yeah, actually, you're right. Like, I do find it really interesting. Like, if you can capture someone's attention in 30, 60 seconds and be really intentional, I think that's awesome. Um, so I went to school for communications. I graduated from the University at Albany. And then I was really lucky in terms that I had a professor who was really adamant about education as it related to like the best agencies to go work for. So when I was an undergrad, I had a list of like the top agencies I wanted to work for. And it was because of my professor who was really like, no, these are the people you need to have on your radar. So I had applied for this program called the Student Workshop at the Martin Agency, which is an IPG owned agency. They have the longest advertising relationship with Geico. They're the ones that came up with the caveman, the gecko, like it's one of the longest standing relationships, client and advertiser, kind of in advertising history. So I always tell people who ask me, you know, how did you get first started? Like, what was your first experience like? And I tell people I kind of got dropped into a sea of advertising very quickly because it was a very intense program where they gave you a live brief. Like, you had to come up with a pitch, you had to come up with a strategy. This was like when Snapchat was like first a thing and was like just coming out. It was like the new emerging platform. And I worked on a really big CPG brief, and we ended up presenting it to the head of marketing. And the idea won, and now the idea that we pitched ended up being on shelves. So there's a certain CPG brand that now makes mini tubs of hummus, and like that was my strategic initiative. So it's really crazy to see that happen. And once that happened, I was like, oh no, okay, I love this. This is what I want to do. Unfortunately, though, the Martin Agency is based in Virginia, and I am a true New Yorker, and I didn't want to live in Virginia, so I moved to New York. I went to a smaller digital shop where I led content strategy, paid media strategy, and social media management. And again, influencers were starting to become a thing. They were more focused on bloggers at the time, so we would work, you know, on strategy in terms of partnerships with bloggers. And then I left because that agency got acquired. And then I landed at Golan New York, which is another IPG agency, a huge public PR firm. And I always tell people I kind of landed at Golan at the right time because that's when everyone was like, what do we do with these people? How do we work with them? How do we partner with them? And my first client was Hyatt Hotels. And this was when influencers were starting to kind of get incorporated into a social content strategy. And then from there, I was able to I ended up leading the entire consumer division for influencers. And I executed on work that I'm really proud of. I helped activate the first influencer activation for Pepsi for one of their new brands at the Super Bowl. I helped Hyatt launch a new rollout for their loyalty program at the Oscars, incorporated influencers into that, led the largest, which this campaign almost killed me, but the largest influencer program for Magnum ice cream with Unilever in the US. So I helped them kind of break into that emerging market in the US because Magnum was super popular in Europe, but no one really knew about Magnum in the US. And now, like, you'll know, like, there were a ton of influencers one year that were all doing Magnum ice cream posts. Like, that was me.
That's you.
That was
I
me.
saw that.
Yeah, I'm sure you remember. Anybody that followed a bunch of influencers would be like, okay, yeah, I know what you're talking about. So I spent
Which
a
was
lot
random,
of time.
right? Because Magnum's so European, and so to
Yes.
see it in the U.S., it was that was like back before this was such a a strategic initiative across many brands to leverage influencer.
Yes, and that was a really big initiative for the Unilever team because again, it was like their first entry point into the market from an influencer perspective. So we cast a very wide net in terms of the types of influencers that we worked with, and we're able to do some really great stuff with the Magnum team. And then from there, I did a lot of stuff for a ton of brands, Eileen Fisher, L'Oreal, helped revamp all of L'Oreal's influencer strategy, which was really fun. And then I ended up moving to Texas, which is where I live now. And I stayed with Golan. I ended up working for their Dallas office where I managed B2B influencers, which was a really interesting experience because obviously you think of consumer facing influencers all the time because you see them all the time.
Right.
But then people often overlook the B2B space and forget that there are thought leaders in terms of enterprise solutions and tech that have really great authority and are able to be really great storytellers. So I worked with Cisco WebEx to lead one of their small B2B influencer campaigns to talk about the benefits of working with WebEx as a small business owner, because, you know, everybody uses WebEx. It's a huge enterprise solution, but they had an issue with storytelling for smaller businesses. So we ran an entire kind of storytelling, diverse influencer campaign to talk about how WebEx made such a big difference for people's personal business. And which was awesome. And then I left Golan and I went to a smaller shop called January Digital, which focused solely on luxury and prestige influencers and paid media. So while I was there, I led paid media strategy and influencer strategy for NARS Cosmetics across the US.
Okay.
Which obviously as a girl who likes makeup, like who doesn't want to work on NARS? It was a very
Yeah.
easy sell when they approached me. But yeah, so I did that for just under a year, and that was really fun and interesting. And I think one of the things that NARS in January we were able to do really well was just marry the idea of performance and marketing strategy with influencer marketing. Because I think,
Mm-hmm.
one of the things that happens with influencers is people often sometimes think, oh, well, they can just check every bucket. They can be top funnel, mid funnel, bottom funnel. They can solve every single marketing issue that we have. And I don't really think that's true. I think the best approach to influencers are really strategic and intentional approaches, because if not, like, there is no marketing solution that does it all. If it existed, we would have used it already as marketers, right? So I think that was something that was really eye-opening, and we were able to drive really impactful results for NARS. I helped them launch one of their biggest media initiatives with a Google beta and influencers. We did their first kind of branded influencer partnership ever, in terms of like, NARS is a, like I said, prestige brand, and their
Mm-hmm.
founder is still alive. So they don't do a lot of, you're not going to find like a Mac times Patrick Star collab for NARS. So we helped them kind of figure out what the best approach was for one of their launches. And it was great. I loved it. But like I said, and like I kind of got back to in the beginning, was just, I realized that there was a gap in the market. I used to work, and I tell people this all the time, like, I worked with all the big agencies, like all of the big ones that you hear about, that you talk about, like they used to send their emails to me. Like I used to work
Mm-hmm.
with them directly. And it was clear to me that there wasn't a huge prioritization of diversity or inclusion. And if there was, it was very much like, oh, I'm going to do this to tick a box.
Mm-hmm.
Which I was like, yeah, that's not ideal, nor should that be the approach, especially if you're going to be a influencer marketing agency and there are so many influencers
Mm-hmm.
that speak to so many different audiences. So thus CFG was born, and I started in November of 2019. That's when I left my job. I started CFG before I had left my job. I left my job. I started in November. I left my job in December. And we started with one client, and now we've grown to a roster of about 25 clients
Wow.
who are trending to do over $1 million in brand deals this year, which is absurd and crazy if you think about it. And it's been fantastic. That's kind of like my long-winded version of how I got here.
It's a great long-winded version though. I mean, seriously, because well, first of all, I knew you had quite a bit of experience. I think we spoke during our last chat just about your Golan times, but
Yeah.
I mean, you have really worked across so many different industries as well. Like I didn't realize that in terms of industry marketing, like extremely vast. So very impressive. So I guess, when was it? Because I know that you discussed specifically with Golan. I'm sure you saw it at other places that you had worked at as well, that like the way that diversity was approached was something that was kind of like that checking of a box. Like for you, what
Yeah.
did it exactly? Yeah.
Yeah. There were a couple moments, but one of the most important moments that I can recall was I worked on Pepsi when the Kendall Jenner campaign aired. Like
Oh,
we worked
yikes.
on the Pepsi team.
It's like that's the case
Um,
study for how to, yeah, okay.
yeah, and again, like I said, I'm a
Yeah.
Black woman. Like I can't avoid diversity or inclusion. It's like
Hmm.
embedded in everything that I do, right? But um, we worked on the Pepsi team,
Okay.
and I very distinctly remember that morning coming into work and everyone kind of like being like, oh my God, like, what are we going to do? Blah, blah, blah. And like, thank God it wasn't. If it was our team that worked on that actual ad, it would have never aired. Like, that would have never happened. But it wasn't. It was another agency. It was a goal. And we were just working on some other Pepsi brands. But I remember having a very candid conversation with my teams and saying, this is a direct response to lack of representation in the room or lack of empowerment in the room,
Mm,
because there
mm,
could have been someone in the room who was like, oh, this is a very bad idea. But did they feel empowered enough to stand up and say, oh, hey, guys, I don't think you should do this? And one of the most, and this is anecdotal, but I was at an event a couple years ago where the CMO of a former Fortune 500 company told this really impactful story. And I tell it all the time because I think it's just eye-opening of why it's so important to have representation in the room. But a CPG brand, it was a Unilever brand. They had just rolled out this brand new campaign. And they had invested a ton of money. They signed like the best advertising agency, and they were rolling out their campaign, and they were so excited about it. And then it flopped. Like, the results were horrific. Like, they were like, and no one in the room could figure out, okay, like, what happened? Like, why did we end up here? The premise for the ad was, it was a Black mom at the beach with her kids, and they were enjoying, you know, products at the beach. And then the mom got up and jumped in the ocean to go swimming with her kids. And like, if you know anything about Black women and their hair at the time, like, nobody was going and getting their hair wet. Most of them had perms or texturizers. Like, there was a lot around Black women's hair and swimming that just, that cultural nuance was missed. And a brand lost a couple $100,000 because of that. And that's what's continuously happened. And luckily for me, I always tell people, I worked in places where my voice was always empowered, or maybe I just made it be that way. I don't know, but I never felt like I couldn't speak up, to make sure that my clients could always avoid those types of issues. Because to me, that's the worst case scenario, right? Like, especially being the diverse person in the room to give perspective. And then, you know, it would be different if someone on the Pepsi team was like, well, I tried to tell you guys and you guys didn't listen. But that's really likely not what happened, right? And there were a lot of shifts that occurred after those moments. And again, like I said, being on the Pepsi team at the time definitely gives you a different perspective. But those were some of what I would consider kind of the most poignant moments where I was like, you guys have to do better. Like, something has to change. You can't continue to operate like this in this industry, especially when we're supposed to be able to reach people impactfully and be able to tell really great stories as marketers. Like, if I can't speak to a diverse audience, or if I don't have a team that can speak to a diverse audience, then I'm really limiting myself from a marketing capacity, which the CEO part of me is like, yeah, that's a bad business decision. And then the human part of me is like, but you should just want to be diverse and inclusive anyways. You should want to be able to speak to the communities that you serve. So there are a lot of things that occurred on my side that I was like, yeah, this is not great what's happening here.
And so then tell me how you're doing things differently with the CFG, like now that you're in the driver's seat of anything that you bring. So like, you know, how do you take those learnings, and of course, now brands are coming to you. You're sort of in the opposite side of the equation. So what does that look like?
Yeah, and that's a great question. I think one of the things that we do, and I actually had a conversation with another brand yesterday. We were walking them through our capes and all that stuff. And the woman had asked me, she stopped me and she was like, so you don't have any white male hetero guys that you represent? And I was like, no. There are more than enough agencies that represent them. Our roster is 100% diverse from top to bottom. And that's really important. The other thing that's really important, though, is that I think, unfortunately, just a consequence of this industry, there are some people who think that diverse talent can't drive the same results, or they're not going to be able to deliver. And there are a lot of implicit biases that are ingrained into that we are working to combat all the time. Like I talked about, I have a robust marketing experience. So like, for me, it's very easy to combat those biases if I can just prove my results. It's not hard for me to then be like, okay, well, if you want to talk about CPM, or if you want to talk about CPE, like, all of my clients fall within industry standard or are more efficient. So now what? Like, what is the barrier to entry from working with them? Because at that point, you don't really have one. Like, if I'm combating some of those biases with results, there's not much you don't have much of a rebuttal to me to say, oh, well, I don't think she'd be a good fit. Or like, I try to get as deep into some of those as I can, because I've seen it firsthand. Like, I've seen some of the backhanded comments where it's like, oh, well, can she change her hair if she works with us? Or, oh, well, do you think she's going to be able to fit like our aesthetic? And is there something she can do differently, or can she dress differently if she's going to be a part of this campaign? And it's like, these people have grown their following and their loyalty with their audience from being who they are and representing their communities. It is irresponsible of us as marketers to then say, well, can you change it so that we can feel like less like this is less daunting because we're working with someone that doesn't fit whatever our cookie cutter influencer mold looks like.
Right.
So that's something that's really important to me. And I think with a lot of our partners too, we try our best to kind of help remedy some of those issues. And our clients are fantastic where they'll say, you know, okay, can you share a little bit more about the diversity across this campaign? And then our clients will be like, oh, if they need a Indian influencer who talks about hair care, like, oh, I know someone that can join on. And I say all the time, like, my goal is that everyone wins. Like, there are so many times where things come across my desk and we may not represent someone that will fit the bill, but I'm happy to pass it off to somebody else because I know, oh, you'd be perfect for this. Like, which I think is not the typical influencer agency model. I think it becomes very like money hungry and there's a lot I can say there, but you get the point. And we're very much like, we want everyone to win because I think the increased representation is what we all should want and should be striving for.
So yeah, that all makes so much sense. And I feel like, especially within this industry, you know, of course you're seeing across the board that there are a lot of brands right now that are sort of like racing to the finish line to figure out their diversity mission. What does that ratio look like within who they're engaging with? How much do you find that you're spending time educating brands on, like, you know, is there an education piece to this as well?
Yeah, there is for sure. And I'll be honest and say that, you know, when I think racial tensions in America are still quite high, but I think when they had kind of reached its peak, we had a lot of conversations with agencies and brands across the board to help them understand what they can do better. And I think those conversations we were happy to have. I'm more than happy to to help educate and help these people understand what they've done wrong and how they can do better. And the other thing is, like, we asked our clients, like, I literally sent an email across our agency and said, hey, like, what, especially because there were things going on, you know, with George Floyd and Breonna Taylor, I had asked my clients, like, for all of you that identify as Black, African American, what do you want brands to know? We got all the responses. We put it in a Medium article, and like the response that we got was just so many people were so impressed. And I was like, these are the conversations that need to be had transparently. Like, you guys need to understand from their perspective what they're expecting of you versus trying to kind of like slap a Band-Aid on it and hope for the best. Like, anecdotal example was this influencer that I'm familiar with, and she's a pretty sizable influencer. There was a fast fashion brand that she talked about frequently and said, like, they're horrible. I never want to work with them. Like, they don't believe in diversity and inclusion. They steal from Black owned brands all the time, blah, blah, blah. Like, she was adamant. And when all this was happening, that same brand reached out to her and was like, hey, we'd love to have you as an ambassador. We know we need to do better. And I was like, you guys are missing the mark. Like, you guys are just entirely missing the point. And I think there is a lot of false, you know, advocacy. And I would challenge influencers to see through that, because I've said it before. I tell my clients this all the time. Like, if you weren't a priority for this brand, or if you weren't a priority for this agency before, it's likely you aren't the biggest priority now. It's probably that they're trying to save face. And don't get me wrong, there are some that I think are going about it in a really, really strategic way where, you know, they're bringing on influencers to help them figure out their marketing strategy. Okay, well, how do you cast people? How do you photograph people? What type of makeup artist, hairstylist do you bring on set so that you can ensure you have representation across the board? Like, those are the things that I think are more intentional and altruistic in their approach. But I think I have to challenge people all the time to say, can you see through this kind of, like you said, race to the finish line to be inclusive, to be diverse, to have increased representation? Because there are some things that come across my email inbox and I'm like, you wouldn't be here if people weren't criticizing you for lack of diversity and representation.
You're right.
And now that you are here, what are you going to do differently? How are you putting your money where your mouth is versus, oh, well, we're just going to fix this in Q3 and then go back to normal in Q4.
And I think, like, where we take this as a really sensitive topic for our business model is we truly do see, and we chatted about this, that affiliate marketing and linking and performance-based marketing is a major entry point for a lot of BIPOC influencers. It's really a starting point for a lot of people. So when we look at who we represent, the talent that we're casting, it's an incredibly diverse group to begin with. Let's chat about that a little bit. I know that you wanted to talk about performance, so I'm curious to hear your thoughts on that piece.
So we've talked about this before, but I think one of the things that plague this industry in particular is the lack of what I consider just standardization across the board. Their influencers are people, right?
Mhm.
And I think there is an aspect of it that, you know, you may not know what to charge, or you may not understand performance and how that impacts your rate. And I always tell my clients, like, everything we do at some point is going to be presented to either a brand manager, a CMO, there's going to be a deck somewhere with you
Mhm.
in it, and
Mhm.
they're going to be measuring the efficacy of this campaign. Where do you want to fall on that scale? Do you want to be on the, this was fantastic, this was a great return on investment, like, we love this person, we want to work with them again? Or are you going to end up on the side where this didn't do anything and this didn't drive results? Which is why I try to educate my clients as much as I possibly can for them to understand kind of like what their metrics mean, what they need to be doing better, how they can improve. And I'm the first person, my clients will tell you this all the time, no one is going to out metric me when it comes to performance. Like,
Mhm.
I am not the influencer manager or CEO to do that with, because I've sat in these seats, I've run these numbers before, I've written these analytic reports. Like, you're not going to out. I've had brand reps be
I
like,
love
oh
it.
well, we're looking for a CPM of this and this,
Yeah.
and you don't fall under that range. And I'm like, tell me how you're calculating your CPM, because the industry standard is XYZ and my clients are well below that industry standard. So something's not adding up.
That is
And
the
then they'll
tea
be
right
like,
there. Seriously, it's true. I love that. I love it.
but that's why
Oh
you
my
have
gosh.
to
Yeah.
understand performance. Like, it is critical. I tell people, like, influencing is a part of marketing. It is one aspect of the marketing funnel. If you
Mhm.
don't understand how it works, you are going to have a very difficult time advocating for yourself and your worth, which is where we come in. Like, I'm happy to be the bad guy. I don't mind, like, because at the end of the day, what's not going to happen is you're going to take advantage of people who don't know better. Like, for example, MagicLinks, you guys, you know, you focus on affiliate marketing. Could you imagine if a brand partner was like, oh, well, this is the number that we think is right for return on affiliates. We just made it up, and now you guys need to adhere by that. You'd be like, what?
Yeah, yeah.
That
Well,
makes no
but
sense.
we do fully cast a campaign, so we're always having that conversation, right? And figuring out what true ROAS looks like, and it's incredibly complicated for sure.
It
And where's
is.
to really how to put your finger right on the pulse of it is really challenging. So being able to, as an influencer, having someone like you that can really advocate and crunch that, that is like a leg up above plenty. And then when you're focusing on also your roster being all minority based, like, so tell me about, actually, let's talk about the roster. I'm very curious as well. So you
Yeah.
said that they're all
We're
minority, like, what's, yeah,
100%
who do we have
diverse
here?
from
Yeah.
top to bottom.
Okay.
So I'd say, and I think for us, when we think about diversity, we think about diversity in race, ethnicity, diversity in location, diversity in
Hmm.
size, diversity in orientation. Those are all the things that we look at when we're trying to make sure that our roster is as robust as possible. Because I think,
Hmm.
again, like, for example, people don't think about regional diversity. Like, when you think about a lot of the bigger influencers or the influencers agencies, like, they're all based in New York or they're all based in LA, right? But
Yeah.
like, there's a whole other market of the United States that it's not just the East Coast or the West Coast. So it's important for
Right.
us that we have representation. If someone's saying, okay, I want to speak to middle America, who is, you know, and I have a CPG brand for mascara that's sold at drugstores, like, we want to make sure that we have diverse talent that can speak to that, and we can represent some of those, you know, secondary markets that still have a ton of value, but they, you know, that's important to us too, aside from just, oh, okay, well, we have one Black person, we have one white person, we have
Hmm.
one Asian person,
Right.
and we have one Muslim person. Like,
Hmm.
it's more than that for us. And it also is important to us that we have diversity in the audiences that we're working with. So, like, I have people on my roster who can speak to Black women who over index on wellness. I also have people on my roster who can speak to a Latina audience that, you know, over indexes in entrepreneurship and business. Like, it's important to us that we have that wide breadth. And don't get me wrong, like, we are one agency that's been around since November of last year, right? So, like, I think in my wildest dreams, I'd want to be able to represent every single person on the planet to ensure we can cast that wide net, but, you know, one day at a time.
Listen, 25 in less than a year during coronavirus is a damn accomplishment. Seriously, that is incredible. Like, that, that alone is a lot. Really, I mean, and this is the year really where, unlike what many predicted, and I'm sure you've seen that trend as well, influencers are really closing in more than ever
Yeah.
before. It's kind of like those budgets are definitely here to stay, and we're moving
Yeah.
into that busy time of the year. Yeah.
Exactly. And I think it is a testament to the need for this. Like, I think triple digit growth during a pandemic is
Hmm.
not what you would expect, right? So the fact that we've been able to grow significantly, even within that, is a testament to how much this is how important this is, and how vital this representation is. Like, I had a contact reach out from, a huge e-commerce brand, and she said, when I saw
Hmm.
your roster, she was like, oh, I thought this was their multicultural division. And the person who passed the roster on to them was like, no, like, this is just like who they are as an agency and what they're committed to. And I was like, oh, this is music to my ears. This is exactly what I want. This is perfect, because that's what I want people to understand and recognize, is that this isn't multicultural. This is just us, who we are. Like, we are deliberately diverse, intentionally inclusive. That's just who we are, and we're not going to change or compromise on that, because I think there are a ton of agencies who will cast whomever or sign
Hmm.
whomever so that they can, make bank and become a whatever big huge agency they want to be. But for me, it's really about ensuring that we are deliberately diverse and intentionally inclusive in everything that we do, and that the people that we work with get that increased representation. Like, I can count how many text messages I've gotten from clients where they're like, this is the biggest deal I've ever gotten. I've never been able to secure a deal this large. I never
Yeah.
thought I'd be able to work with this brand. These brands keep coming back every single time because we're working together. Like,
Mm.
I can sleep peacefully knowing that that's the case. And like, for
Yeah. Yeah.
me, as a Black woman, nothing makes me happier than seeing other minorities buy their dream houses, build their dream houses, buy their dream cars. Like, the generational wealth that is able to be secured as a result of having a strong team and representation and getting your worth is the most impactful part of what I've been able to do. Like, nothing makes me happier than that, because I think when you think of easiest ways to accumulate wealth, or ways to kind of get yourself out of previous just systematic racial problems that most BIPOC people face, not a lot of people talk about marketing. Like, a lot of people
Hmm.
talk about, oh, I'm going to
Yeah.
work in finance, or I'm going to be a doctor, or I'm going to be a lawyer, where there's an entire
Hmm.
new industry where that is a possibility, right? And as whatever I can do to ensure people get there, like, that's what I'm here for.
I love that. And honestly, I have very much a similar feeling about marketing as a whole,
Mm-hmm.
because really it's sort of, to me, it's like the way we talk about representation in TV and film. I consider it the same way with Instagram and YouTube.
Yep.
This is what kids are watching. This is what the next generation is consuming. And it's important to see that even when it comes to how people interact with brands, how people interact in general, that there is equal representation there. It's such an incredible thing to be working on. And so we're running a little over on time, but I do have one last question for you, Annelise. We
Yeah.
like to close out always sort of asking for somebody, and you just brought it up kind of on your own, for somebody that's just starting out kind of on your path.
Mm-hmm.
What's your best piece of advice?
Yeah. I'll give two pieces of advice. I
Sure.
give an advice to influencers, because I think they don't get a ton of advice from this perspective.
Sure.
And then I'll give advice for the people who want to play in this space. So for the influencers, I think my biggest piece of advice is educate yourself as much as you can as you get into this field.
Mm.
Like, there are so many resources that are out there that are available now more than ever too, because I think people know, like, oh, people are trying to take advantage, or they assume I don't know what I'm talking about. So for influencers, I think educate yourself as much as you can, and try to do some of that groundwork at the onset. Like, lay some of that groundwork, because I think some people think, oh, well, I don't need an assistant, or I don't need a photographer, or I don't need an agency until I hit like this level. But it's like,
Mm.
if you have a good team, you can get to that level so much faster than if you're just trying to do it on your own. Like, I think it's important to know when you need help, right? And then for the people who are trying to go
Okay.
my route, where you're trying to build an agency and you're trying to, sign talent and manage talent, I think one of the biggest pieces of advice that I can give is that this industry is saturated. So if you don't have a very clear POV or intent or purpose, like it's going to be very easy to get lost in the shuffle because this is such a saturated
Mm-hmm.
industry. So I would advise you figure out like what is your positioning, what is your brand, you know, your differentiator, what does your brand value look like, what value add are you able to provide, how are you shaking up this industry, because there's a lot of people in it who are loud and sometimes don't know what they're talking about. So what is your contribution going to look like and how is it going to be different? Because I think this industry needs that more now than ever. So yeah, I could say a lot, but I think I'll cap it at those two.
I love that though, and you know, it's true. There's certainly you know, great minds, and there's also some that aren't so much. And unfortunately, you know, power positions kind of are an interesting place to be in. And so, building equity within that for us is a huge deal at MagicLinks. Annelise, I'm super excited to also meet with your roster eventually. I know we were talking about
Yeah.
really explaining to your roster of talent, like, you know, let's talk even deeper about you and I could nerd out all day long about
Yeah.
marketing, performance, like we
Performance
could
and
go all day.
ROAS. Like, yeah, we could go
Yes, like
forever.
we could get into it, you know, like that's what
Yeah.
we do as our trade. But you know, breaking it down, like you said, influencers don't really receive all that information all the time. That's one of the major reasons why we're having tea time, especially for all of
Yeah.
our BIPOC influencers that are out there that maybe aren't also, you know, doing this with, I don't know, financial backing from family, however, like whatever that situation may look like, it's not the same for everyone, but there's a lot
Yeah.
of stories to be told. So yeah, so happy to have you. Oh my God. I'm like so
Yeah.
in love with you. You're amazing. Seriously, like such a boss. It's great. Yes.
Thank you. I
So Annelise,
appreciate
thank you
it.
again. Yeah, it's been so good chatting, and thanks everyone for tuning in. There's so many good comments in here. It's like everyone is so excited. It's great. So lots of positive energy this week. I think the world needs it, and so we're so happy to hear from people like you, Annalise.
Yeah, thank you so much for taking the time and making the space for voices like mine to be heard. We really appreciate it. And I know I have to wrangle about 26 people to
I
get
know, I know.
our webinar going, but I promise we will, because I do think understanding performance marketing is really important, especially for influencers. So thank you guys so much, and I'm really excited to see what MagicLinks is doing next, because I know you guys have a lot of really great stuff in the pipeline, and
We
we're
do, and
excited.
so does CFG. Hello. I mean, we're here's to 3 to 4 mil in the next
Oh my
second
gosh.
half. We'll do it.
Could
We'll
you
do
imagine?
it. All right.
All right.
Thanks, girl. I'll
Thank
talk to you
you.
later. Bye, everyone.
Bye.